Okay, so you guys liked my last video where we talked about some tech and tips where you can play like the pros and learn some new strats. Let's take some time today to actually talk about some more tech that I've discovered inside the dungeons for Season 2 of The War Within. And starting off, we have some stuff in Dark Flame Cleft. Dark Flame Cleft is actually kind of an interesting dungeon, and learning how to do the minecart correctly is one of the most important aspects of improving some of your time and some of your speed in this dungeon. The minecart, what you need to know about it is that it has like a combat state. And whenever it's in combat with mobs, it'll stop moving. There are also specific checkpoints that the minecart can be pushed to as well, and it will kind of stop to make sure that you have all the mobs that are killed off. And those checkpoints are like, pretty far into the dungeon. How most players, in my experience, have been doing Dark Flame Cleft is they've been pulling one pack at a time and just kind of killing off the mobs that are on top of the minecart. The best way that you can actually deal with this dungeon, though, is you can gather mobs like you see on screen here and run ahead of the minecart as the tank. Then, once the minecart stops in a location, or say it gets combated by a mob, you then drag all the corridor creepers and a bunch of the darkness mobs back on top of the minecart, you AoE them down, and then you rinse and repeat. And this will change your minecart section from around 5 pulls to, let's say, 2 pulls. Now, another thing is the Candle King, and similar to what we're going to say about the coin-operated crowd pummeler in a little bit, is you can actually tank the Candle King up against the wall, and if all 5 players are stacked up against the wall, like almost on top of one another, it reduces the radius of which these candles can actually spawn. That will actually increase your melee uptime by a substantial amount. Now, you do get knocked whenever one of the candles spawns underneath you, but it doesn't really matter. As long as you're not getting stunned by the candle and continuing to stand in it, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Getting knocked doesn't even do any damage to you. It's not really relevant. The most important thing, though, is that the candles are going to be more adequately stacked, increasing or decreasing the amount of people that actually have to put the circles on top of the candles and increasing your melee DPS uptime. Moving over to Cinderbrew Meadery, if you watched the video that I made at the very beginning of the season talking about everything you need to know about the dungeon, I kind of glossed over the fact that there was an engineering buff. It has an ability called Flame On. And what this does is it says it strikes enemies in front of the caster, inflicting 1% of their maximum health as fire damage every 1 second for 4 seconds, and disorients them for 5 seconds. This is actually a pretty huge deal, and not something that I actually see commonly used in Cinderbrew Meadery in general. If you're a healer, in my opinion, with an open profession slot, now I know this requires you to have an open profession slot, but if you are a healer with an open profession slot, grabbing this engineering flamethrower is actually a pretty sizable amount of damage on a couple of the pulls that they are used on. Whenever you pick it up, though, it does have a limited amount of time that you can take to use it. So obviously if you use it on a hobgoblin or something like that, it's like super optimal. And so it just kind of depends on where you're using it. But this is something that, at least in high level keys, you're going to see people having access to 100% of the time. Additionally, in Cinderbrew Meadery, the Bee Wranglers have a cast called Beezooka. This Beezooka puts a line on the ground. If you outrange or at 30 yards away from the Beezooka or the Bee Wrangler mob itself, it actually dodges the Beezooka cast, making you take substantially less damage because the Beezookas actually hurt a lot. Moving on over to Priory, the Sacred Flame, we have a couple of mobs that you can actually dodge just by running fast. Chainmail and the Lynx are these 2 mobs that I'm going to be talking about today. Chainmail is the mini-boss that is spawned after you end up killing off Guard Captain Suleiman at the very beginning of the dungeon. Chainmail does an ability called Lunging Strike, and if you are, let's say, around 20 yards away from the mob, you can actually just like start pre-moving right before the Lunging Strike happens and be able to dodge it. A similar thing happens with the Lynx Pounce. So notably for Chainmail can actually be cast on melee, which makes it a little bit more tricky, but the Lynx, their Pounce can only be cast onto ranged targets. Now, the Lynx can also be stunned while they're in the midair, so things like Chaos Nova from a Demon Hunter, if you see that going off, or just like pushing them with effects like Typhoon, gripping them back with Ursul's Vortex, dropping a Ring of Peace or a Freezing Trap in front of you. Those are all effective strategies to be able to dodge and remove damage that's going to be on your entire party. There are also some mobs at the end of Priory called the Risen Footmen, and whenever they die, they have a cast called Light Expulsion, which you don't actually see it's a cast. It's just like an invisible thing, and they blow up and do radiant damage to your entire party. What you don't know about these mobs is if they are CC'd whenever they die. So say they're in a Chaos Nova or a Hodge or something like that. Whenever they die, they actually don't cast the Slight Expulsion cast. So what high-end groups are doing is they're pulling, a couple of these, like 4 of these at once with the 2 packs that are onto the side, and then making sure that they press an AoE CC right as some of them die. Obviously, you're not going to be able to like even cleave all of them, but if you even mitigate like 3 or 4 of the casts, that's a lot less damage that you're going to be taking just in general from those mobs. In Rookery, those big mobs that kind of like pull you in and they cast that chain lightning effect on them? Yeah, the Void Diffusers. They have an ability called Arcing Void. That's what that chain lightning effect is. And the Arcing Void can actually be line of sighted and force the Void Diffuser to start recasting. Now, what's actually notable about this is the Arcing Void is actually a 3-second long cast. And so whenever it gets forced to recast over and over and over again, it's not actually going to be doing too much. It's just going to be standing there and no longer casting that suck because the Arcing Void is higher priority. So standing there, forcing that mob to recast, or say you're potentially in a dangerous situation, you need to line of sight that ability. Those are some of the things that you kind of need to be looking out for, especially whenever you're in the Rookery. Additionally, after Stormguard Gorin, there is a pack that has an Ascendant and 2 Crushers. After you kill this Void Ascendant, you can actually jump down into the final boss area, and the Crushers will eventually snap to you. This, it can create a little bit of a tricky situation. I've seen some wild stuff go on with their snapping where it can potentially evade reset a pack as they're snapping. So if you take it a little bit slower and allow those Crushers to snap down to you, that's probably the preferred strategy, just to make sure that they're going to be consistently snapping and not like evade resetting a bunch of mobs. But that is a way that you can actually increase your speed in Rookery if your time is running a little bit tight. Bloodgate has some new tech that some players have actually been utilizing. I don't see it used all too commonly yet, but I think it's something that players are going to be starting to look to use in the future. Bubbles is probably the most dangerous mini boss in all of Mythic Plus this season. With an ability called Backwash, it just does a lot of damage to your entire group. You can actually skip around the side and go into the water against Bubbles. Now, there are fish in the water, but players have determined that using an invisibility potion or using Shroud and being able to walk around Bubbles is probably the most effective strategy. You can also skip it with, Shroud, and say you have water walking from like a Shaman or a DK in your group. You can easily walk around this mob, but like you see on screen right here, invisibility potions and just not even having the water walking is also effective for skipping Bubbles if you say don't need his count. He does have True Sight though, and so that's why you have to hug the far side wall. Motherlode has a couple of tips that we can kind of talk about here. First and foremost, the coin-operated Crowd Pummeler, the first boss in this dungeon. If you actually tank the boss against the wall, it can actually decrease the radius of which the bombs are going to be spawned out away from the boss. And this is actually very valuable because then it's going to make it a lot easier for you to actually be able to kick the bombs into the boss. There's none that are going to be like 60 yards away from other bombs. And so this is just a pretty good strategy. Now, you do have to watch out because the coin magnet, if your tank isn't going to move the boss correctly, the coin magnet can suck up a bunch of the coins, but tanking it against the wall is totally an effective strategy to make sure the bombs are a little bit more stacked. Additionally, in the final area of Motherlode, you can actually send your tank ahead to get all of the bombs to fixate onto them. What we've been doing is actually bloodlusting this pull with like a double war machine. Realistically, you don't have to bloodlust this pull if you just want to do like a single war machine and send your tank ahead to get like 60 mines on them and then pop all of your offensive CDs from your DPS to be able to kill all those mines off adequately, and your tank just kind of kites out the mines. That's also a great way of dealing with it. Now, what you need to know about this is you're going to have a lot of specialists, so there's going to be a lot of ground effects from the specialists, but this is something that can actually save you a lot of time because now all of your DPS aren't getting chased around by a mine, and you can kill off 20 mines in one fatal swoop. The first pull of workshop's one that players have been looking at high-end groups doing and wondering whether or not they can do it. The answer is more often than not, you probably want a warrior or a vengeance demon hunter. Now, the reason for this is because Silent Sigil and Interrupting Shout are abilities that lock out mobs and they just like incur a lockout and the bombs don't recast for 20 seconds. Something like a Solar Beam or any other AoE CC does not incur a lockout on the mobs, and the mobs will actually recast once they come out of the CC. But what you can do is if you're playing with a Protection Warrior or a Vengeance Demon Hunter, is after the mobs get grouped up, you throw a bunch of AoE CC at the pack. Then, whenever the mobs are all going to cast synced up with one another, you press Interrupting Shout from Prot Warrior, you press your Silent Sigil from your Vengeance Demon Hunter, and bang, you're going to be able to finish off all these bombs and put them on a 20-second lockout, which will allow you to basically finish off the pack. So it should be pretty easy. A similar thing is also true for the Blazicon room. So if you want to do a pull like that in the Blazicon room, that's basically how you should be looking to do that pull as well. Now, you might see some high-end groups actually being able to DPS Cujo through the box. How do you do that, you might ask? Now, what you need to do is your tank has to get Cujo up against the corner of the box. And then you, as the DPS player, you walk around the far side, the long side of the box, and then you're going to be able to kind of like shim yourself into position. And if you have a weak aura, it'll say safe on it. And that's telling you that you're going to be safe. You're going to be putting yourself up against the other far side corner, and then you'll be able to DPS Cujo, ideally through the box. This works for melee or ranged players. Sometimes it's a bit more advantageous for ranged players. For melee DPS, your tank is going to have to be really good to get the boss in the appropriate position. After Cujo, there's a mini boss called the Blastotron X80. It's that crab that shoots out the beams. What you need to know is that whenever the boss goes into the phase where it puts all the lightning on the ground, you can actually outrange all that lightning. Realistically, you should only be looking to do this if your healer also wants to outrange the lightning. So say you're a ranged DPS, you should not be standing out there on your own, because then your healer's not going to have line of sight to you. But at 30 yards, that lightning effect that you see from the ground no longer spawns. And so if all of your range are going to be standing far away and hitting the boss from like this like staircase area, it shouldn't be too bad, and it allows you to have basically 100% caster uptime. For the final tip for this video, we're going to talk about Machinist Garden and kind of like how to play Machinist Garden. I've seen a lot of questions. It's like, oh, am I just supposed to really lock in, or is there any tech that you can kind of give me for Machinist Garden? What you need to know is that playing towards the middle of the room is always going to be the best benefit of Machinist Garden, and your tank needs to be taking the boss away from where those plants are on fire. Whenever those plants start to spew the fire, it becomes a lot more tricky, particularly for melee DPS, to get good uptime consistently. And so making sure that you move the boss to the opposite side of the room for that is going to be a big deal. For, again, playing towards that middle pillar, that allows the cogs to bounce off that middle pillar and gives you a little bit more of a known direction that the cogs are going to be bouncing. Because if you're up against like the weird angles of the wall, it's going to bounce off, and it can bounce at really weird angles depending on where it's going to contact the wall. But the middle pillar is always the most safe result. In addition to that, there are also 2 safe spots that are in this room. Obviously, there's the entrance staircase, but there's also one of the side doorways. If you stand flush against the side doorway, the cogs can hit you, in quotations, but they're not actually going to hit you. It's going to bounce off the wall before it ends up contacting you. And so those are 2 spots, particularly if you're ranged, that you can stand to be able to continue to hit the boss with better uptime and not having to actually dodge away from the cogs or losing casts. Now, you are going to have to get back in the middle of the room whenever you want to DPS the plant, or whenever the flame jets are going to start going off. So you're going to have to get back in the room at some point. But that's one of the easier ways to kind of deal with the boss, and a boss that is probably the hardest from this season. And those are the tips that are going to help you play like a pro. If you guys kind of enjoyed this content, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. I've also been streaming a lot more recently, so come check out my stream as well. And if you're really, really enjoying the content, make sure you throw a Twitch Prime. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.